Well, today I want to talk about a couple different kinds of training that are very common. And I'm going to talk a bit about what I do because right from the very beginning, we've been doing this that it's not something that I didn't even know what I was doing, but I just did what I felt was right. And eventually I figured out what I was doing, but I didn't know how to put it into words. I do now. And recently we have been reading a few articles and watching some videos that pretty much say the same thing. So what I want to talk about is training the mind versus training the body and the difference between the two and how it works. And I want to start off by giving you an example of something that happened a number of years ago. I've shared this story before. I was riding one of my own horses, the one and only time I've ever had a horse bolt. And that was one of those things that, I probably shouldn't have even been on her, but anybody that has ever experienced a bolting horse knows that a bit can't stop a bolting horse. I was listening to one horseman he's quite an advocate of bits. He does not even believe in any bitless riding. He figures that'll get you killed. But even he says a bit will not stop a bolting horse, because once the horse starts to bolt, its mind has taken control of the body and it says run for your life. And that's not what you want. And when you try using the bit to stop the horse, you're effectively trying to go through the body to get to the mind to get that horse to stop. Now the mind has control over the entire body, and it's gonna, so that's the reason that you want to get to the mind. Now, there is going to be times that you will get to the body, you'll use the body to get to the mind, but those are rare. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the little girl I was riding at the time, she decided to take off. Now, because I had trained the mind, I was riding in a halter just like this, and loose rein, it was just draped down like that. And when she decided to take off, all I had to do was just pick up the reins and say, "Ho!" And she came to a complete stop with the slightest little bit of pressure. And it wasn't because I had a bit. It probably wasn't 150 feet. I didn't measure it, but, within 150 feet, she was at a standstill. And why? Because I was training the mind to respond to me, and I was communicating directly with the mind, which controlled the body. So she came to a stop. No bit involved whatsoever. So now I consider the difference between training the mind and training the body is kind of like the difference between, a friend and a prisoner or a hostage. And how that works is, well, first off, there's no shortage of devices out there for training the body. Quite a few of them, actually. And I think they fall into basically two categories. There is the category of what I'm not going to, this is not one specific item either, because it's a number, so don't even think about trying to start a debate here. But there are the items that will cause pain, discomfort, or threaten to. And that's kind of like if I want you to go out and cut my grass for you and I point a gun at you. You're going to do it. You're going to go cut the grass. You aren't going to want to. Your mind's not going to be there, but you're going to go do it because I'm pointing a gun at you. At some point in time, you might decide, that's not a very big gun. I think I can take them, and you might take a swing at me, or you might just say no. Either way, the problem is I got to get a bigger gun now. And I might even blow a hole in the wall with it, just to show you what that big gun can do. And, at which point you're going to go, yeah, okay, I think I better go cut the grass. So you go cut the grass. And you might always cut the grass for me, and you might get to the point where you always will cut the grass for me. But I'm always going to have that gun, and you're always going to know what it can do. That threat is real. It's always there. By the way, you notice I just stopped him, and I didn't even pick up the reins. That's because I'm communicating with his mind, not his body. Anyhow, that gun's always going to have to be there. I'm always going to have that gun, and you're going to know what it can do, even if I don't use it. I might not even point it at you, but it's always going to be there, and the threat is real. the other category of things is various forms of restraints and stuff that, force the horse to do what you want it to do. And, I've talked about this in bits, how I did another video not long ago. I talked about, getting a horse to stand still for trimming. I want its mind down at that end of the arena where I'm working, not at that end of the arena where its mind says, hey, I'd rather be over there. And, that's basically what we want, is we want control of the mind. But these things, you can put a horse in a box stall. It's not going anywhere. You haven't really solved the problem because its mind still wants to be somewhere else. And it'd be just like if I locked you in a prison cell. You're going to stay there, but you aren't going to want to be there. Because, if I happen to leave that door open, you're gone. Same thing with tying up, and I've talked about, how physically tying a horse, keeps it where you want it physically, but its mind doesn't want to be there. So the minute it's not tied, or, same with if I tie you up, I can keep you wherever I want. But the minute you're not tied, you're gone. The mind isn't there. You're still sitting on a sandy beach drinking margaritas. Your mind isn't tied up somewhere. I'll use an example of one of these many things that people use is like tie downs. You put a tie down on a horse and you think you've solved the problem because the horse isn't flipping its head around anymore. Well, it can't. You got it tied down. So you haven't really solved the problem because the mind still wants to be flipping its head around. And, that would be similar to as if, I don't like you waving your arms around. I can tie your arms down to your sides. You can't move your arms. So problem solved. Not really, because you still want to move your arms even if they're tied down and not moving. And as soon as I untie them, you're going to want to move your arms around. You're going to be flapping them all over the place, whatever. I'm always going to have them tied down. I'm always going to have to use that rope, just like I would always have to use the gun. So those are methods of training the body. And that's much more like having a hostage or a prisoner and forcing them to do what you want them to do. That's not my goal. My goal is to train the mind. And the mind, that's more like having a friend. Now, I've talked before about leadership and how it makes the horse feel good to have a good leader. And that's something we want to do, is we want to have a good leader. It makes the horse happy, it makes the horse want to be with you, and it makes it want to do things for you. Now, it's like having a friend that doesn't speak the same language as you. And if you have a friend that doesn't speak the same language as you, you have to, and this is why I always refer to training as education for the horse, you have to teach them to understand you and what you want, and so they can meet your needs or what you want. But if you have a friend that likes being around you for some reason, you make them feel good, you provide them with some emotional need of some kind, then when the time comes that, hey buddy, can you cut the grass for me? Sure, no problem. You don't have to point a gun at them, you just have to ask, and as long as they understand what you're asking, they're going to go do it. So that is primarily the difference between training the mind, which is like having a friend, and training the body. That's more like a prisoner or a hostage. And, well, we all know what that turns out like. There are actually a few cases, I should say when it comes to putting a horse in the stall, some people will say, well, my horse likes his stall. As soon as I take it into the barn, it wants to run to its stall. Well, there's also cases in humans where similar situations like that have taken place, and it's kind of complicated. It's like people that stay in abusive relationships, or years back there was a hostage taking in Stockholm where a scenario evolved that is now referred to as the Stockholm syndrome, where the hostages actually eventually started sympathizing with their captors. And that's kind of a weird thing. The other thing is that, it's like prisoners. There's a phenomenon in humans, and it's called institutionalization. It's where that's what they know, that's what they understand, that's what they feel comfortable with. That prison has become home to them. They can't function in the outside world. They feel more at home in the prison than they do when they're free, and they'd rather be in the prison. So the same thing can happen to horses too. They basically become institutionalized, where they actually want to be in their box stall. So just because your horse displays behaviors that say that it likes this stuff doesn't necessarily mean it's okay or it's right. All right. So to me, that's the difference between training the mind and training the body, and why I have always put the emphasis on training the mind, because that mind has complete control over the entire body. So if you can get to the mind, you got the whole body. It's as simple as that. Whereas if you try using any other form of coercion, you got to go through the body to get to the mind. And if it's gone into panic mode or something like that, that isn't always going to work. So we're going to emphasize, we're going to focus on, training the mind, which, like I said, is more of an education than anything, because they have to learn to understand what you want. And I've always found horses to be quite willing animals. Once they understand what you want, they're willing to do it. So there you go, folks. In a nutshell, what I believe is going to save a lot of people a lot of time, a lot of money, because all those gadgets they sell you for training bodies, they can be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars if you start buying all of them. So you don't want to be doing that stuff. Plus, you got to waste the time using the stuff. You got to have a place to store it, all this stuff. Well, as you can see, my reins, that's a lead rope. My bridle, it's a halter. You don't need a whole lot of fancy stuff to work with your horse. And, well, even the saddle I'm sitting on is a pretty cheap one. And so, if you follow the theory of training the mind or educating the mind, you can not only save yourself a lot of money, but a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of disappointment when those things you buy don't work in the long run. So, there you go. Train the mind, not the body. Have a good day, folks.